The large office was as silent as a tomb as Mr. James Carter, the branch manager of Swift River Bank, glanced at the folder in front of him. His hand, adorned with a flashy gold ring, tapped the desk impatiently. Sitting across from him was a woman not much younger than him, but dressed in a sharp gray business suit, her brown skin radiating confidence despite his frown. Mrs. Amara Johnson was no stranger to bank procedures, and yet here she was asking for a routine business loan to expand her growing accounting firm. James smirked, his eyes narrowing with a cold, dismissive stare. He'd seen plenty of people come through his office, but something about her didn't sit right with him. He made a quick mental decision, fully aware that he held the power here, and leaned forward with a curt, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson, but we simply don't believe your business is a suitable investment for Swift River." Amara's brows furrowed, but she kept her calm. "May I know why, Mr. Carter?" "My firm has been profitable for 5 years, and I've met all the requirements for the loan." "Well, let's just say some businesses are riskier than others," he replied, his words dripping with an implication that cut deeper than any denial letter. He watched her reaction, convinced she'd be humbled and leave quietly. But to his surprise, her eyes held a defiance he hadn't anticipated. 3 months later, James Carter sat in the same office, only this time, he wasn't the one in control. 2 auditors stood in front of him, both wearing badges from the very firm he'd denied a loan to, their faces calm and serious. Mrs. Amara Johnson entered the room behind them, her gaze steady as she looked at him without a trace of anger, but with a quiet, powerful determination. James felt his heart skip a beat, his mind racing as he realized the magnitude of what was about to unfold. And so, the tables had turned. 3 months earlier, it was a breezy summer morning in Lawston City, and the downtown area was bustling with life. Amara Johnson parked her car outside Swift River Bank, her mind buzzing with plans for her growing accounting firm. The office was doing well, and with a new team in place, Amara knew they could take on larger projects, if she had the funding to back her expansion. With a neat folder tucked under her arm, she entered the bank and made her way to the loan officer's desk. She was confident. Her firm's success was backed by solid figures, and she had built a reputation in the community as a reliable accountant. After a brief wait, Amara was escorted to the manager's office, where Mr. James Carter sat behind a large mahogany desk. James looked up when she entered, his smile polite but his eyes slightly narrowed. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she greeted him, extending her hand. "Mrs. Johnson," he replied, shaking her hand briefly before gesturing for her to sit. Amara wasted no time, outlining her proposal with a clear and confident voice. She explained her vision for expansion, the potential clients she could secure, and how the additional capital would allow her to hire more staff to meet demand. James listened, but his attention seemed to waver. He watched her in a way that made her feel like he was seeing right through her, not actually hearing her words. She finished her presentation, confident she had made her case. "I'll have to review this in detail," he said curtly, not giving away any hint of his decision. "Of course," she replied, maintaining her calm demeanor. She handed him the folder, knowing she had presented everything he would need. A week later, Amara received a letter from Swift River Bank. She sat in her office, staring at the envelope, a strange feeling settling in her gut. She tore it open and read through the lines, her expression shifting from hopeful to incredulous. The letter cited a lack of confidence in the viability of her business and listed her application as high risk. The words hit her hard. She took a deep breath, trying to push away the disappointment. But as she read the letter again, a surge of anger replaced her initial shock. She had seen enough of these letters in her years of business, and something about the wording and tone felt off, almost personal. Determined to find answers, Amara decided to go back to the bank the next day. The following afternoon, she sat across from James Carter once more. He didn't seem particularly surprised to see her, and greeted her with a smirk that bordered on condescending. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, folding his hands on the desk, "I trust you received our decision." "Yes," she replied, her voice calm yet firm. "But I'd like to understand the reasoning. My firm meets all the necessary criteria for this loan." "Like I said before, Mrs. Johnson," he replied smoothly, "certain businesses carry certain risks." Amara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is there a specific risk you're referring to? Because on paper, my business metrics are stronger than some other firms that have recently been approved." James shrugged. Approval isn't based solely on metrics. We have a responsibility to consider all factors. His words were vague, but Amara sensed the implication immediately. She felt her pulse quicken, a wave of anger rising. Still, she kept her voice steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. "Well," she replied, standing up and collecting her papers. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Carter. I'll be sure to share this experience with my business associates." She walked out, head held high, while James watched her leave with an expression that bordered on amusement. But as the door closed, she made a silent vow. This wasn't over. 2 months passed, and Amara poured her energy into her business, refusing to let that rejection slow her down. One afternoon, her assistant, Jenny, rushed into her office with a big smile. "Amara, you have to see this." Jenny handed her an email detailing a city contract for a thorough financial audit on all banks within a specific region due to recent concerns about discrimination and misconduct in lending. Amara's eyes widened as she read the email. Her firm was eligible to bid for this massive audit project, and they had a strong chance given her firm's excellent record. Within days, Amara's firm secured the contract. She put together a team of her best auditors, and they began their work, reviewing the files and practices of various banks across the city. The process was intense, but Amara felt a sense of purpose and pride in holding these institutions accountable. She had a personal stake in this audit and was determined to do it justice. It was a regular Monday morning when James Carter received an official notice of audit. He frowned, surprised and slightly irritated. Audits were a routine part of banking, but the timing felt unusual. 2 auditors arrived later that week to go over the bank's records. James felt a chill run through him when he saw their ID badges bearing the name of Amara's firm. And just as he thought he'd gotten a handle on his discomfort, she walked in, clipboard in hand, her gaze unwavering as she introduced herself and began discussing their auditing procedure. Each file reviewed, each question asked seemed to hit a little harder, his discomfort growing with every passing minute. Amara remained professional, but the subtle confidence in her posture was unmistakable. After the first day, James sat alone in his office, a bead of sweat forming on his brow, as he considered the unexpected reversal of fortune. Amara had become the one with the power, her firm now standing in judgment of his, and with the depth and detail of their audit process. He had no idea how deeply this investigation might go. James tried to keep his cool as the days went by, but every meeting, every conversation with Amara and her team sent a fresh wave of unease through him. He started to grow impatient, irritable, snapping at his own staff whenever they asked for updates or clarification. On the 3rd day of the audit, Amara and her lead auditor, Carlos, entered his office with a thick folder in hand. The tension in the room was palpable as they sat across from him, flipping open the file without a word. Amara looked at him, her calm gaze fixed on his, as if daring him to look away. "We found some irregularities in the loan approval process, Mr. Carter," she began, her voice steady but unmistakably sharp. "It appears that some applications were approved with minimal review, while others, like my own application, were labeled as high risk despite strong financial metrics." James's face tightened. He forced a casual smile, even though his palms were beginning to sweat. "I'm sure there's an explanation for that, Mrs. Johnson. Not all applicants present the same qualities." Amara didn't flinch. She turned the folder toward him, showing a line of applications that had been approved despite financial histories far weaker than hers. In fact, some of these applications looked downright risky on paper. Carlos, her lead auditor, added, "We've noticed a pattern, Mr. Carter. It appears that certain groups have had much easier access to loans than others, without an adequate basis in the applicant's financial standing." James opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, he was truly speechless. They had cornered him, and the evidence was there on the table. He quickly scanned the documents in front of him, searching for something, anything, to explain away the discrepancies. "I can assure you," he said, his voice wavering, "we follow a strict and fair lending policy here at Swift River Bank." "Then you won't mind providing additional records, will you?" Amara replied smoothly. Her tone was polite, but the intensity in her gaze made it clear she wasn't buying his explanation. James swallowed, his mind racing. His initial plan of brushing off the audit and intimidating Amara into backing down was crumbling before him. It became painfully obvious that he couldn't bluff his way out of this situation. As the audit progressed, Amara's team uncovered more troubling patterns. Time and again, loans were denied to applicants who shared similar backgrounds to Amara, often with vague or flimsy explanations. They even discovered emails exchanged between James and a few other bank employees, discussing how certain types of clients should be discouraged from applying for loans. The further they dug, the clearer the picture became. Carlos looked at Amara one evening after compiling the latest findings and said, "This is systemic, Amara. It's not just your application they rejected unfairly, it's happening across the board." Amara nodded, her expression resolute. "We're going to bring this to light. No one should have to go through what I went through." As their findings grew, the story started to make its way to the bank's regional headquarters. Word spread that a full-blown investigation was underway, and the branch was attracting attention for all the wrong reasons. One evening, as James sat in his office after hours, he received a call from the regional director, asking for a detailed explanation of the audit findings. His hand shook as he stammered through the conversation, trying to downplay the audit's severity. But it was clear. The bank was taking this seriously, and James was no longer in control. The next week, Amara and her team were summoned for a formal meeting at the regional headquarters of Swift River Bank. James, his face pale and his usually confident demeanor shattered, sat at the end of the conference table. Executives from the bank's regional board were present, watching him intently. One of the executives, a stern woman named Ms. Larkin, addressed Amara. "Mrs. Johnson, we've reviewed the findings from your audit. It's clear that some serious irregularities have taken place under Mr. Carter's management." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting from Amara to Ms. Larkin and back again. Amara nodded, handing over a report. "These documents outline the patterns we found, as well as specific examples where loan denials appear to have been based on reasons unrelated to applicants' financial standing. In several cases, approvals were granted to businesses with weaker financial backgrounds than those denied." Ms. Larkin flipped through the report, her expression growing darker with each page. Finally, she looked up at James with an expression that sent a chill down his spine. "Mr. Carter," she began coldly, "this behavior violates not only Swift River's policies, but also federal lending laws. Discriminatory practices are grounds for severe penalties, both for you personally and for this branch. I hope you understand the gravity of the situation." James stammered, struggling to form a coherent defense. "I never intended. That is, I thought we were just protecting the bank's interests. High-risk clients. You have to understand." But Ms. Larkin was having none of it. She turned back to Amara and her team. "Mrs. Johnson, we are deeply sorry for this. You and your team have done a great service by uncovering these practices. Rest assured, we are taking action." James felt a surge of panic. "Please, Ms. Larkin, there must be a way to resolve this without." But Ms. Larkin held up a hand, silencing him. "There's nothing more to discuss, Mr. Carter." After the meeting, Amara walked out of the conference room, a weight lifted from her shoulders. She had not only secured justice for herself, but also exposed an unfair system that had hurt countless others. In the days that followed, the news spread across Lawston City. Swift River Bank had implemented sweeping changes in its lending practices, and Mr. Carter's name was all over the headlines. Not as a respected bank manager, but as a cautionary tale of power abused and justice served. James Carter's world fell apart as news of the audit findings spread. Local newspapers and websites covered the story, exposing Swift River Bank's discriminatory practices under his management. Words like bias and discrimination were now tied to his name, tarnishing his reputation. Clients started to pull their accounts, and even longtime staff members began questioning his actions. He spent his days barricaded in his office, feeling the weight of every critical look from employees he'd once commanded. For James, this wasn't just a career setback, it was the loss of everything he'd worked for. No longer respected or trusted, he had become a symbol of all that was wrong with the banking industry. But the worst was yet to come. One morning, as he sat brooding at his desk, James received an unexpected call. It was his lawyer, Alan Winters. "James," Alan said without preamble, "I have some serious news. I got a call from federal regulators today." James sat up straighter, gripping the phone tightly. "Federal regulators? What do they want with me?" Turns out, the audit uncovered enough evidence to warrant a full investigation. Alan replied, his tone grim. "They're launching a formal inquiry into your lending practices, And it's not just about Swift Thriver's policies anymore. You might be facing personal liability for violating federal anti-discrimination laws. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. James's mind raced. Personal liability? That meant fines, or worse, criminal charges. He stammered, struggling to process this new level of consequence. Alan, this can't be happening. I was just doing what I thought was best for the bank, he protested weakly. Alan sighed. You'll need a stronger defense than that, James. I suggest we prepare for the worst. The audit records make it clear that the denial pattern was, well, specific. The line went silent as James's world crumbled even further. Meanwhile, Amara Johnson's life had taken a turn for the better. The success of her audit firm spread rapidly through the business community, and potential clients were lining up for her services. She had done more than just expose one bank's malpractices. She'd become a local hero, a symbol of justice and resilience. Her firm had grown quickly since the audit, hiring new staff and landing new contracts with both local businesses and larger institutions that admired her work. Her once small accounting firm had transformed into a sought-after financial consultancy, with clients ranging from startups to established companies. And the best part? She was now in a position to help small businesses like hers get the fair treatment they deserved. But despite the victory, Amara wasn't one to rest on her laurels. One afternoon, as she sat in her office, she received a call from a local journalist named Sarah Reed. Sarah was working on an investigative piece about discrimination in the financial industry, inspired by Amara's audit. Mrs. Johnson, your work has shed light on practices that many suspected but couldn't prove, Sarah began. Would you be open to an interview? I want to tell your story and dig deeper into the changes that need to happen in this industry. Amara paused, considering the impact such a story could have. Her firm had already uncovered wrongdoing, but bringing it to a wider audience could inspire lasting change. Yes, I'd be happy to, Sarah, Amara replied. If sharing my story helps prevent others from facing the same bias, it's worth it. A few days later, Amara sat in a well-lit coffee shop across from Sarah, a small recorder on the table between them. The hum of the cafe faded into the background as Amara began recounting her experience with Swift River Bank and the uphill battle she faced after James Carter's unfair rejection of her loan application. It was a shock. Honestly, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I'd worked hard to build my business, only to be told it wasn't viable when, in fact, my numbers were stronger than other applicants who got approved. I knew something was wrong. Sarah listened intently, jotting down notes. And when did you decide to act? Amara smiled slightly. The moment I left his office. I wasn't going to accept being judged on anything other than my work and credentials. The audit was my way of not only proving him wrong, but also helping others who might be facing the same challenges. They spoke for nearly 2 hours, diving into the details of Amara's audit process, the barriers she encountered, and the significance of the victory, not just for her, but for all small business owners who faced unfair treatment. As they wrapped up, Sarah looked at her thoughtfully. Amara, I think people need to hear this. Your story is going to make waves. Desperate and facing mounting pressure, James realized he needed to salvage whatever he could of his career. He considered suing Swift River Bank, claiming they had thrown him under the bus to save themselves, or even blaming his staff for the decisions he'd made. But each option seemed to backfire the more he thought about it. No one would believe him, not with the audit report as concrete evidence against him. In a final act of desperation, he decided to confront Amara directly. He wanted to appeal to her sense of mercy, hoping she would feel some sympathy, or, at the very least, agree to help him in exchange for some concession. One evening, as Amara was leaving her office, James appeared outside. Looking more haggard than ever, she stopped in her tracks, surprised to see him there. Mrs. Johnson, please, just a few minutes, he said, his tone almost pleading. She eyed him warily but decided to hear him out. What is it, Mr. Carter? James took a deep breath, his voice wavering. I've lost everything, Amara. My job, my reputation. I don't know what to do. You have to understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just doing my job. Amara shook her head, her gaze steady. Your job was to treat every applicant fairly, Mr. Carter. Instead, you decided who deserved help based on something other than their merit. People's livelihoods were affected by your choices. But pleased, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. Isn't there something you can do? Maybe you could speak to the regulators. Explain that this wasn't as bad as they're making it out to be. Amara crossed her arms. I'm not going to excuse what you did, James. You thought you could play God with people's futures. Now you're just dealing with the consequences. Her words hit him like a slap. He'd have been hoping for sympathy. But Amara was unyielding. Finally, she walked past him without another word, leaving him standing alone in the darkening evening, the weight of his decisions crushing down on him. With James's plea behind her, Amara refocused her energy on her growing firm. The interview with Sarah was published, and the story spread quickly, igniting discussions about fairness in lending practices across the city and beyond. Small business owners reached out to her, inspired by her story and seeking guidance. Amara's firm had not only gained business, it had sparked a movement. One day, as she sat in her office, Amara received a letter from Swift River Bank's new branch manager, apologizing for the treatment she'd endured and inviting her for a conversation about ongoing reforms. The letter ended with a note from the regional director herself, expressing gratitude for Amara's courage in exposing the flaws in their system. They had taken measures to overhaul their practices, and Amara's audit had set the standard for how they would operate moving forward. Amara felt a sense of peace as she read the letter. She had come a long way from that initial rejection, proving to herself, and to everyone else, that she would never let anyone dictate her worth. As she looked around her office, filled with new team members and bustling with activity, she knew her work was only just beginning. This was her mission now, to champion fairness, to ensure every person who came through her doors was treated with respect, and to build a legacy that no one could ever deny. Amara's firm, now a beacon for fair business practices, was thriving. The attention from Sarah's article had not only attracted new clients but had also caught the eye of advocacy groups and local government agencies. Soon, Amara found herself invited to speak at community events, small business panels, and even local government meetings focused on economic fairness. Her once modest office was now bustling with energy. Employees moved around with a purpose, fielding calls from small business owners eager to seek her services and asking for advice. Each day brought new opportunities, but it also carried reminders of why she started in the first place. One afternoon, Amara received an unexpected email from the city's Office of Economic Development. They were impressed by her work and wanted to partner with her firm to launch a series of free financial literacy workshops aimed at small businesses from underserved communities. The proposal was a dream come true. Amara had always wanted to help entrepreneurs who, like her, had struggled to find a level playing field. This was her chance to expand her impact even further. But as she read the email, she noticed one detail that made her pause. The workshops would require coordination with a few local bank representatives, and to her surprise, Swift River Bank was on the list. For a moment, Amara wondered if she should request a different bank be involved, given her history with Swift River. But after a moment of consideration, she realized that this was an opportunity to create real change from within. She picked up the phone and dialed the contact number from the email. A cheerful voice answered, "City Office of Economic Development. This is Sheila speaking." "Hi, Sheila, this is Amara Johnson. I received your email about the financial literacy workshops, and I'm very interested in partnering with you." "That's wonderful, Mrs. Johnson," Sheila replied excitedly. "We're thrilled to have you on board. We really believe your story and expertise will make a huge impact on these workshops." Amara smiled, feeling a sense of purpose growing within her. "I noticed Swift River Bank will be one of the partners. I'd like to ensure they understand the vision here. This program is about breaking down barriers, not putting more up." "Oh, absolutely," Sheila assured her. "We'll be arranging a planning meeting with all partners, so you'll have the opportunity to discuss this directly with them." Amara hung up, her mind racing with plans and ideas. She was going to ensure that this partnership upheld the values she believed in. If Swift River was truly committed to changing, they would have to prove it. A week later, Amara walked into the city office for the workshop's first planning meeting. Around the table sat representatives from various financial institutions, local community leaders, and, to her surprise, a new face from Swift River Bank. The woman, a middle-aged professional with a confident smile, introduced herself as Dana Kim, Swift River's newly appointed community outreach manager. Amara noted Dana's firm handshake and the genuine warmth in her smile. From the start, Dana seemed different from the old management at Swift Trevor, open, approachable, and, above all, sincere. "Mrs. Johnson, I've heard so much about you," Dana said. "I want to start by apologizing for the past treatment you received at our bank. We're working hard to change our approach and ensure fair practices for everyone." Amara nodded, appreciating the honesty. "Thank you, Dana. I appreciate that, and I look forward to working together. But I need to know that Swift Driver is fully committed to this initiative. For too long, small businesses have been overlooked, and we can't afford for that to continue." Dana nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. We're committed to turning things around, and I assure you the bank's leadership is on board. We're here to make things right, Amara." As they worked through the meeting agenda, Amara felt cautiously optimistic. Perhaps this collaboration could lead to real change. For now, she would take Dana at her word, but she intended to keep a close eye on Swift River's involvement. Weeks passed, and the launch of the financial literacy workshops arrived. Amara's team, alongside Dana and other representatives from Swift River Bank, gathered at a community center bustling with small business owners and budding entrepreneurs. Amara stepped up to the front of the room, feeling a familiar surge of confidence. She looked around at the eager faces, remembering how she'd once sat in their place, yearning for guidance and opportunity. "Thank you all for coming today," she began. "Today is about empowerment. We're here to equip you with the knowledge and tools to make confident financial decisions, to grow your businesses, and to know your worth." As she spoke, she could see nods of understanding and relief from the audience. Amara shared her own story, recounting her struggles with unfair lending practices and how she fought to build her business. She spoke about resilience, about never letting someone else decide your future. When she finished, there was a round of applause, and she felt a swell of pride. She was making a difference, and these workshops were just the beginning. During the workshop, Dana and the Swift River team worked alongside Amara's staff, helping attendees understand loan applications, financial planning, and the basics of business credit. Dana, true to her word, was attentive and hands-on, answering questions and offering genuine support to every attendee. At one point, Amara overheard Dana say to a participant, "We're not here to judge anyone based on anything but their hard work and dedication. Your numbers and your commitment should speak for you. Nothing else." Amara couldn't help but smile. Maybe, just maybe, Swift River was finally starting to understand. As the workshops continued over the months, the impact was evident. Amara's firm received letters and emails from participants, many of whom expressed their gratitude for the workshops and the new sense of confidence they felt. Some had even secured funding for their businesses with guidance from the sessions. But one day, a letter arrived that hit Amara on a personal level. It was from a young woman named Keisha, who had attended the very first workshop. Keisha explained that she'd recently been approved for a loan at Swift River, a loan that allowed her to expand her small bakery business. The letter read, "Dear Mrs. Johnson, I don't think I would have ever had the courage to apply for a loan again after the rejection I faced a year ago. But after your workshop, I felt like I could take on the world. And I did. Swift Driver approved my loan, and now I'm able to hire more staff and even start catering. Thank you for inspiring me and giving me the confidence to try again. Sincerely, Keisha Brown." Amara felt a lump in her throat as she read Keisha's letter. This was exactly why she fought so hard. Keisha's success was a testament to what could happen when people were treated fairly and given the resources they needed to succeed. As she put the letter down, a new wave of determination washed over her. She realized that while the battle with James Carter had been a difficult chapter, it had paved the way for something much greater. Now, it wasn't just about her story. It was about creating a ripple effect that would uplift others. Months later, as Amara was leaving her office one evening, she spotted a familiar figure lingering by the entrance. James Carter. James looked weary, his once proud demeanor replaced by a defeated slump. He gave her a nod of acknowledgement, as though they both understood that they'd come full circle. "Amara," he said quietly, almost respectfully. I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I didn't understand back then, but seeing what you've accomplished, I realize now that I was wrong." Amara paused, studying him. "James, I fought hard because people like you wouldn't give me a chance. But this isn't about you anymore. It's about changing the system so that no one else has to fight as hard as I did." James nodded, accepting her words. With a final glance, he turned and walked away, fading into the evening. As Amara watched him go, she felt a sense of closure. She had found her purpose, and it was bigger than any grudge or personal battle. She was building a legacy, not for revenge, but for the countless people who, like her, had dreams worth fighting for. From that day forward, Amara continued to expand her firm's impact, leading workshops, mentoring small business owners, and pushing for reforms in lending practices across the state. Her work gained national recognition, and soon, Amara Johnson became a household name, a true champion for fairness and opportunity. And as she looked at the growing team around her, she knew she'd done more than just survive her own struggle. She created a pathway for others, ensuring that in the world she was helping to shape, everyone would have a fair chance to succeed. Amara's life had transformed. She was no longer just a business owner. She was a leader, an advocate, a role model. But with her newfound influence came new challenges. After her story spread nationwide, people began reaching out from all corners, sharing their own experiences with discriminatory practices in lending and business. One afternoon, she received a call from Congressman Elijah Green, who represented the district. Known for his work on equal opportunity legislation, he wanted to discuss Amara's insights and see how they might work together to create lasting changes in lending laws. "Mrs. Johnson, what you've done is extraordinary," Congressman Green said warmly. "Your work has inspired people across the nation. But I believe we can take this further. Create policies that prevent people from facing what you went through." Amara's heart raced. A partnership with a congressman could turn her local impact into a national movement. "Congressman Green, I would be honored. This fight is bigger than me, and I'm committed to doing everything I can to bring fairness to the system." They scheduled a meeting, and as the call ended, Amara felt a surge of determination. It was clear she was stepping into a new role, one that would push her to fight on a larger scale than ever before. A week later, Amara sat across from Congressman Green in his Washington, D.C. office, surrounded by stacks of reports, economic studies, and policy proposals. The congressman was a tall, dignified man with a thoughtful gaze and a commanding presence. He laid out his vision for what they could achieve together, a bill that would enforce anti-discrimination policies in banking with real consequences for violators. "We'll call it the Fair Access to Capital Act," he explained, his tone resolute. It would mandate regular audits for lending institutions, impose fines for proven discriminatory practices, and create a system where applicants can appeal unfair loan rejections. But to make this happen, we need powerful voices like yours. Amara nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes, Congressman Green. People shouldn't have to fight just to get a fair shot at building their dreams." Their work began in earnest. Amara joined Congressman Green and his team, testifying at hearings and sharing her story with other lawmakers. She spent days speaking to senators and representatives, making them understand the impact of lending discrimination on small business owners. With every meeting, every speech, and every testimony, she felt the movement growing. Amara's story continued to reach people far and wide, and soon she received a message from an unexpected source. Dana Kim from Swift River Bank. Dana had heard about the Fair Access to Capital Act and wanted to support Amara's cause. In a carefully worded email, Dana explained that she had been lobbying Swift River's leadership to implement changes in line with the proposed legislation. And now, the bank's CEO was willing to publicly endorse the act. Dana's email read, "Dear Amara, Swift River Bank has learned a hard lesson, and we are determined to change our ways. With the Fair Access to Capital Act, we believe we can help build a new reputation, one that aligns with fairness and equity. I'd like to invite you to a meeting with our CEO to discuss how Swift River can support your efforts. This is just the beginning, and we want to make things right. Sincerely, Dana Kim." Amara read the email with a mixture of surprise and caution. Could Swift River really be sincere? The wounds were still fresh, and she hadn't forgotten the hardship she endured. But she also recognized that change could mean something bigger if it came from within. After some consideration, she decided to meet with Swift River's CEO. The next week, Amara found herself seated across from Swift River Bank's CEO, Alan Brooks. He was a polished, soft-spoken man with silver hair and a steady gaze. Dana sat beside him, nodding in support. "Mrs. Johnson," Alan began, "I want to start by offering a sincere apology for the mistreatment you experienced under our previous management. We failed you, and we failed countless others who deserve better. Under Dana's guidance, We're committed to rebuilding this bank's image and operations from the ground up. Amara looked at him, her expression skeptical. Words are easy, Mr. Brooks. What actions do you plan to take to ensure this doesn't happen again? Alan leaned forward, his tone serious. We've started by conducting internal training to identify and remove biases within our ranks. We're also developing a new algorithm to evaluate loan applications based solely on business metrics, eliminating any potential for human prejudice. We want to be the first bank to set this standard, and with the passage of the Fair Access to Capital Act, we're ready to be held accountable to it. As she listened, Amara's guarded expression softened slightly. She could see that Dana had been working hard to push these changes, and if Swift River could truly transform, it would set a powerful precedent. We'll see if your actions live up to your promises, Mr. Brooks, she replied. But if you're serious about this, I'll support the transformation. We both know there are many more banks out there that need to follow suit. Alan nodded, and they shook hands, marking the beginning of an unlikely alliance. Months of lobbying, speaking, and mobilizing the public paid off. The Fair Access to Capital Act gained widespread support in Congress, and in a historic vote, it was passed into law. The act required all lending institutions to adopt fair lending practices, mandating routine audits, transparency in loan decisions, and an appeals process for rejected applicants. The day the act was signed into law, Amara felt a wave of relief and pride. She had fought for this change, and now her efforts had redefined the banking landscape for small business owners across the country. Celebrations broke out among her team, and she even received a call from Dana, who congratulated her on the achievement. Amara, you did it, Dana said warmly. This law is going to make a real difference, and it's thanks to your courage. Amara smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. No, Dana. We did it. It took all of us working together to make this happen. In the following years, the effects of the Fair Access to Capital Act transformed the small business landscape. Entrepreneurs like Keisha, the young baker Amara had once helped, found new doors open to them. Business ownership rose among underserved communities, sparking economic growth and creating opportunities that had once seemed out of reach. Amara's firm became a national consultancy known for advocating fair business practices. She continued to work with government agencies, banks, and community leaders to uphold the standards she had fought so hard to establish. Her journey was celebrated in articles, documentaries, and awards. But for Amara, the true reward was the change she saw in the lives of everyday people who, like her, had once struggled to be heard. One evening, as she looked out at the city from her office window, Amara knew she had made a lasting difference. She had taken her own painful experience and turned it into something transformative, a movement that would inspire others for generations to come. Years later, a statue of Amara Johnson was erected outside the city's Office of Economic Development, honoring her contribution to fair business practices. It became a symbol of hope and resilience for everyone who passed by, a reminder of one woman's fight for fairness. And as young entrepreneurs walked past, some would pause to read the plaque at the base. In memory of Amara Johnson, a champion of justice and opportunity, she fought to give every dream a fair chance and inspired a nation to stand for equality. Amara's legacy had become a cornerstone of fair business practices, proving that one person could indeed make a difference. Her story, her fight, and her courage continued to inspire, lighting the path for future generations who would stand against discrimination and champion justice for all. Years had passed since the establishment of the Fair Access to Capital Act, but Amara's legacy was alive and well. Across the country, businesses sprang up in communities that had once been overlooked. Amara's story became a case study in universities, an example taught in business ethics courses and seminars on equity. For aspiring entrepreneurs and young activists, her journey served as a blueprint for challenging injustice. In her later years, Amara founded the Johnson Institute for Fair Finance and Equal Opportunity, an organization dedicated to fighting for financial equity through research, advocacy, and education. The Institute offered scholarships, internships, and mentoring for students from underrepresented backgrounds who aspired to enter the finance and business sectors. One autumn day, Amara sat on the Institute's board of directors, sharing her vision for its future. Her hair had grayed, but her spirit was as fiery as ever. The room was filled with young professionals, many of whom had been inspired by her story. Among them was Keisha, the baker Amara had helped all those years ago. Now, Keisha was a successful business owner and a board member of the Institute, paying forward the support she had received. "We're not done yet," Amara began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "The Fair Access to Capital Act set a precedent, but our mission must go beyond that. We need to continue pushing, advocating for policies that protect consumers, create financial literacy programs, and hold corporations accountable." The room buzzed with energy as Amara laid out her plans. She envisioned an economic landscape where every individual, regardless of background, had the tools to succeed. One of Amara's most promising mentees was Maya Taylor, a bright young woman who reminded Amara of herself in her early days. Maya had a fierce determination to change the financial industry and had already made waves with her research on loan discrimination in tech startups. With a scholarship from the Johnson Institute, Maya was completing her master's degree in finance and public policy, and she was eager to make her mark. Maya often visited Amara, seeking her guidance and listening to her stories of battles fought and lessons learned. Their conversations became a bridge between generations, filled with stories of resilience and ambition. One evening, as they walked through the Institute's courtyard, Maya turned to Amara. "You've done so much for people like me. I just hope I can live up to it." Amara gave her a warm smile. "Maya, the fight for fairness is never really finished. It's up to each generation to pick up the torch, and I know you'll make an impact. Just remember, you have to lead with your values, no matter how difficult it gets." Maya nodded, her eyes shining with determination. Amara could see that Maya was ready to take up the mantle. The financial industry was evolving, and while the Fair Access to Capital Act had made strides in curbing discrimination, new challenges were emerging. With the rise of digital banking and artificial intelligence-driven loan approval processes, concerns over algorithmic bias came to the forefront. Automated decision-making, while efficient, often lacked the nuance needed to fairly assess diverse applicants, potentially perpetuating hidden biases. The Johnson Institute launched a research initiative to investigate these emerging issues. Maya led the research, dedicating countless hours to analyzing data and understanding how algorithmic bias affected loan approvals for minority-owned businesses. She quickly found alarming patterns that mirrored the discrimination Amara had fought against. Determined to bring these issues to light, Maya organized a press conference to share her findings. Standing at the podium, she addressed a room packed with journalists, activists, and financial experts. The data shows that while the technology behind these algorithms is advanced, it still reflects biases ingrained in historical data. Maya explained passionately, "We cannot allow technology to perpetuate the very discrimination we fought so hard to eliminate. It's time to set new standards for fairness in the digital age." Her presentation made headlines, sparking national conversations on the ethics of artificial intelligence in finance. Amara watched proudly as Maya became the face of this new movement, fighting for fairness in a world increasingly reliant on technology. Maya's work eventually led to a new wave of legislation, the Algorithmic Fairness and Transparency Act. The law required banks and financial institutions to audit their algorithms for potential biases and mandated transparency in automated decision-making processes. Maya's contributions became a landmark in the next chapter of financial justice. As the years went by, Amara witnessed a world reshaped by her efforts and those she had inspired. She knew that, while there would always be new battles, her legacy would endure through the lives she touched and the systems she helped transform. One summer evening, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and a new generation of changemakers, Amara received a Lifetime Achievement Award for her dedication to financial justice. The applause echoed through the hall, and as she looked out at the crowd, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had done her part, and the world was a fairer place because of it. As the ceremony concluded, she turned to Maya and said, "It's your turn now. Keep fighting, and remember, every voice matters." Amara's journey had sparked a legacy of change, one that would continue to inspire those who dared to challenge injustice, forever lighting the path toward a more equitable future. Amara Johnson's life became a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of one determined voice. Her efforts had planted seeds of change that grew into a thriving forest, touching lives in ways she had never dreamed possible. The Fair Access to Capital Act reshaped the banking industry, setting a standard for transparency and fairness in loan practices. Through her battles, she had carved a path for countless others, proving that barriers could be broken and new paths forged. The Johnson Institute for Fair Finance and Equal Opportunity continued to thrive, providing resources, mentorship, and advocacy for underrepresented entrepreneurs. Amara's story remained an inspiration, a rallying cry for anyone who faced injustice and refused to back down. As she neared the end of her journey, Amara watched proudly as Maya Taylor and other young leaders continued her work, tackling new challenges and ensuring her legacy remained alive. The cause she had championed was safe in their capable hands, and she knew the fight would continue long after she was gone. On her last public appearance, an elder yet spirited Amara spoke to a gathering of young activists, entrepreneurs, and supporters. Her voice was softer now, but her words carried the weight of her experience. "Remember," she said, "change isn't a single battle. It's a lifetime of standing up, speaking out, and inspiring others to join you. This fight isn't just mine. It's yours. Take it up and carry it forward." The crowd stood in applause, filled with admiration and gratitude for the woman who had not only changed the banking system, but had shown the world the power of justice, courage, and community. As Amara quietly left the stage, she felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that her legacy was in the hands of those she had inspired. She had lit the torch of change, and now it would shine brightly in the hands of a new generation, guiding them forward into a future where equality and opportunity were rights, not privileges. And so, Amara's journey ended, but her story, her spirit, and her fight lived on, sparking change in every heart she had touched and lighting the way toward a world forever altered by her unwavering commitment to justice.